Hello. I'm going to try a new video method today. I was using my cell phone, and I have a pretty good phone, so it was taking pretty good video, but I'm going to try this because I'm going to screen share. The only downside about the phone is that, me side by side with the screen, wasn't always the best for actually seeing the screen. You guys are supposed to have the PowerPoints with this, but we'll try this one out, and we'll see how it goes. My only, concern is maybe the video quality, but we'll see how it looks, and we're coming up with the best solutions to the problems every day, All right, so today we're going to start talking about World War II, and here's my trajectory for the rest of the year. We have Spanish-American War, 1898, one of the most important wars in U.S. history, one of the most important wars that people don't think about. This is the war that really explodes the United States onto the world stage as an imperial power. Whether on purpose or inadvertently, the United States is left with the remnants of the Spanish Empire in their lap, and basically is saying, should we leave these territories to their own devices? Which might be the more humanitarian thing to do for the people that live there, but somebody else can easily swoop in, England, France, whoever, maybe Germany a few years down the line, and take those territories back. And, that might not be humanitarian. Imagine a world where, the United States left those territories to their own devices, and somebody like England comes in and takes them right over. And then they say, hey, United States, why did you leave us by ourselves? There's no good solution to that problem. The solution that people like Mark Twain and Andrew Carnegie didn't agree with was the solution of America deciding to become an imperial nation. So that's a big jump for the United States onto the world stage, Spanish-American War. That's the first sort of part in the story of how we got to where we are today. The second is World War II. Now, World War II is the generation that fought World War II is called the greatest generation. Right now, we're on this topic of the 1950s. So when you think about World War II, you got to think about that, the greatest generation. Why did they call themselves that? Why are they called the greatest generation? Well, one of the reasons is they beat the Nazis, Now, the realities or limitations of that are debatable, but you got to picture this in the mind of the person, in the mind of, of America at that time and a lot of Americans today. They beat the Nazis, They liberated France. Then they went back with the Marshall Plan and they rebuilt it all. And then we come out on top, biggest manufacturing nation in the world, rocking and rolling, a family with one person working, with one person. And yeah, that person was dad at that time, and that conflicts with our modern sentiment. But that one person working can support that whole household. You can have 3 kids, 2 dogs, a house with a big yard and 2 cars, and one person working. So, it's really something you can accomplish today. And the fact that women have gained an equal footing in the workforce today, and we're still working on areas of that that we talk about next year, but is something to be celebrated. But the downside of how we got to where we are today is that 2 people, 2 parents or 2 partners working in a household with full-time college-educated jobs struggle to even come close to what somebody with just a regular job, run-of-the-mill, anything job came to in this time period, post-war America. And that's one of the reasons why they called them greatest generation. We're going to talk about how they got there, why the United States was like that in post-war years. What we're going to focus on is the home front war. All right, so Spanish-American War, the 3 wars we're going to go over. We went over this already. Spanish-American War. The United States becomes an imperial power, explodes onto the world stage. World War II, Superman, the United States becomes a superpower. We could accomplish anything we want, we could accomplish. And then Vietnam, we face the reality. The United States has to look itself in the mirror and say, what am I really able to accomplish here? And you have to face the reality of yourself, limitations. And that's the trajectory we're gonna take over the next 2 weeks. In there, pockets in there. We're going to talk about the 1950s, The age of consensus. We're going to talk about McCarthyism, the hunt for communists, paranoia. What does it take to make everyone in the country move in the same direction at the same time? And then I'd really like to touch on the space race. Space race is an extension of the arms race of the Cold War. We wouldn't have went on the moon if it wasn't for the Cold War. The space race is something that is overlooked these days, but I think that because of the modern mindset, conspiratorial thinking, and things like this, it's worth touching on. And Neil deGrasse Tyson recently said, when he's met with this question of the hoax, the majority of the money spent on getting to the moon was getting out of the atmosphere and what they call translunar insertion, basically where you go from orbit to shooting off into the direction of the moon. That's the most expensive part. Once you're sailing to the moon, you're just kind of going, it wouldn't make sense. It would cost more money to launch into space and have everybody watching it in the world, either on TV or in person. That would cost more than actually faking going to the moon. It wouldn't make sense to launch an actual ship, if you weren't going to go. Once you're in there, you might as well go. And that's what his point was. If you were going to fake it, you might as well just fake it. You don't fake it halfway and then pull back. All right, I'm sorry. All right, so maybe the classroom background is a little too encouraging for me because now I'm going on my rants. So let me screen share this lesson with you guys. And I'm hoping that, this is going to work. So the aim, how did World War II affect American society? That's going to be our focus, but I want our focus to be more, what was the home front effort and what was the home front experience during this time? What message is Dr. Seuss trying to convey? So you look over here, check out this political cartoon. Dr. Seuss was a big political commentator at that time. He was very, he would be woke if we had to describe him today. And a lot of people misinterpret his cartoons because they only think of him as the kids' book writer, and they're like, oh, he's being a racist or something. It's like, no, he's making fun of racists. He's making fun of people. He's actually the opposite of those things. Even his children's books have a lot of social commentary in them. So if you look at this, it says, what a lucky thing, we've got separate beds. And if you look at the characters, the one on the left is the United States because he's portrayed as, he's portrayed as Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam is the personification of the United States. And then on the right, you have Europe. And it says, Hitleritis, Blitzpox, Nazi fever. And it's all these ailments that Europe has. And then on the bottom there, you have the Italian mumps. And if you look on the real bottom, on the caption, it says, ho hum, no chance of contagion, And how does the United States feel about their separation from Europe at this time? Well, good thing we're over here because we don't want all of that mess that's happening over there. And you could always translate this to modern times. There are a few, either conveniently or inconveniently, phrases and sentiments that directly translate. And one of them is America First. So if we look at this next one, look at this next Dr. Seuss. Look at the lady, and she's reading to the kids, and look at her shirt, America First. Now, these are from the 40s. But America First was a slogan that Donald Trump uses today, but was originally used by, American nationalists at this time. And what she's saying is, look at the top, and the wolf chewed up the children and spit out their bones. But they were foreign children, and it didn't really matter. And the book that she's reading to the kids is Adolf the Wolf. You know, one of the paradoxes about paradoxes, one of the dilemmas about Nazism is it's synonymous with pure evil today. Like, you just say Hitler, and I don't have to say anymore. You know exactly what I'm saying. But back then, there still was this debate, like, well, you know, the Germans weren't really a problem. Maybe if we let them bang out all the other countries, we won't even have a problem on the world stage anymore. And the sentiment among a lot of American nationalists at this time, and this is when nationalism is changing from the nationalism of 1898 and the late 1800s of like purely identifying as American over other national origins, to this vicious put America before everything else at all costs sentiment. And that's sort of what we're seeing displayed here. And Dr. Seuss, you know, 1940s, you know, he's not a modern guy, but this message is very modern, especially because whether Trump realizes it or not, he's borrowing the slogan from the people of the original American Nationalist Party, you know, at the turn of the 20th century. Not the original, but, you know. All right, so early American response. A lot of Americans back then, just like today, feel we don't want to get involved in foreign affairs. Even today, every time you ask a class, should the United States get involved in foreign affairs, people of every side of the political spectrum say no. And this has been a tradition in the United States. We never want to be involved, but we always are, everywhere. So the Depression and World War I were two big reasons not to want to get involved at that time. You know, most recently, our fumbles in the Middle East, which both political parties are against at this point, are the reason not to get involved today. But back then, the Depression, World War I, Americans favor isolationism. They say we need to put America first. We need to help out the United States. We're not even out of the Depression at this point. That's what you got to. People are on breadlines, and you want to get us into this foreign war. Yeah, Adolf the Wolf is chewing up all these foreigners, but if we just jump in there, with what money, he's going to just chew us. So, you know, that is an argument here. So the Neutrality Act outlaws arms sales and loans to nations at war. So what we're trying not to do is help out England, you know, and help out the Allies, the Allied powers. And like World War I, we're going to kind of help them out, but on the sneak. Now, we're not going to focus on the war. We're not going to focus on battles. We're going to focus on what happened in the home front for the most part. And why this is going to be important for you guys is because I want you to recognize, similarities, you know, in what we might be seeing today. Cash and Carry Act. So the United States says we're not going to bring arms to you, England, but you can come here and you can pay cash and carry them out, you know, like a store. So we lend, we exchange, lease arms between the declaring neutrality in the late 30s and us entering the war in the early 40s. You know, we gradually get more and more involved on the side of the British. And if you watch movies like Dunkirk, you know, it is a dire situation for the English, getting bombed every day, hiding in the subways. The whole city would hide in the tube in London, you know, night after night, as, you know, above them was like a 9/11 all over the city for days and days and days. It was a devastating time to be English. So, you know, the United States, the people, the government eventually start to feel for the English being like our cousins, basically, our nationalistic cousins. You know, we got to help them. So the U.S. enters the war. Usually it takes American lives lost for the American people to finally consent to entering war. And if you look at most wars, you know, that's the straw on the camel's back to get us in. Conflict, expansion between U.S. And Japan. U.S. places embargoes on Japan. So we've tried to fight an economic war before we fight a physical war. And it works. You know, Japan is an island nation. So island nations need supplies from the outside. And if they don't have those supplies, they get desperate. And Japan hurts enough and they get desperate enough that they, they attacked the United States in Pearl Harbor and Hawaii. Now, another reason is we were doing what was called island hopping. We were positioning ourselves in the Pacific in case we needed to jump in this war. And it wasn't a comfortable position for Japan to be in because we are encroaching on their territory little by little. It would be like if, later on the Soviet Union places missiles on Cuba in the Caribbean, and that leads to a bad situation because it's in our backyard, or our front yard or whatever it is. All right. Embargo cuts off trade, December 7th, a day that will live in infamy. So remember, back to the FDR lesson, he's famous for one of his speeches. And if you see down here in the corner, there's the words of that speech. December 7th, a day that will live in infamy. Now, when this happens, the United States, a lot of people don't even know what Pearl Harbor is. Pearl Harbor is a place in Hawaii, and they're told, Americans have been killed in Pearl Harbor at the Navy base, and the first reaction is what's Pearl Harbor, but the second is over 2,000 Americans are killed. That's what gets people going. So Pearl Harbor, the fact that it's attacked, really launches Americans into this frenzy of wanting to get involved in this war. And unlike World War I, the draft is still active for World War II, but there's a huge push by Americans to enter this war and to really fight. FDR asks Congress for declaration of war, December 8th. All right. So if you see here, Hawaiian Islands, like I was saying, you have Japan here, and there are all these other little islands that the United States is already posted up at as we're trying to hop closer and closer to Japan. So it's not a comfortable position. You basically have the United States in a wave coming at them. And that mixed with the fact that we have this oil embargo on them and they can't really refuel any of their war machine, pushes them to desperation and pulling the United States into the war. Some of the headlines. Yeah, so some of the video, it's crazy. We were watching a video in class, and it's reconstructed, but it's actual footage, bombing run footage of Pearl Harbor. And me and Grasso were looking at this footage, and we're showing the class, and it's like, this is aerial footage of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Where do you think footage like that came from? It's Japanese footage, and it's funny. Like, we're friendly with Japan today. Japan doesn't hold a lot of animosity toward the United States anymore. Japanese people and the Japanese government. There's not really a tension, surprisingly, to these days. And we exchange information, and one of the things we exchanged was this footage, this bombing footage of Pearl Harbor, and it's really surreal footage. Go check that out on PBS. I think PBS has it. All of this is colorized, obviously. You have the top, which they added the color to, in the bottom. All right. So this is the important part. Enlistment and patriotism. Enlistment and patriotism. So, like I said, unlike in World War I, if you check out this cartoon right here, this is an actual Captain America cartoon from that time period. I don't know if the date is on here, but Captain America was invented by the comic book companies as a propaganda machine, and the Captain America story, like a lot of the superheroes at that time who went off to fight the Nazis in their own respective comics, after the war was over, they had to switch it up, and they invented Red Skull or whatever after. But Captain America was a way to to basically educate people on what was going on, and a means of inspiring young kids to and people who read comics to support the war effort. You know, much like the Uncle Sam down here, I Want You, still a poster that you see in recruitment offices. So patriotism, love for one's country, devotion to one's country. Pearl Harbor, 300,000 men enlist. U.S. calls for people to enlist, and overwhelmingly they sign up. We have about over 16 million join the Army at that time, which is rare, in times of war. A lot of times they needed to call in the draft for that effort. Women fought in different, not in combat roles yet. I mean, that's a real recent thing. Only about 2 years ago, women fought for the right to get on the front lines of battle, and I think they won that. So they are fighting in battle today, but not back then. But they were in the military. They just weren't in active combat. Truman signed an executive order to desegregate military. And this leads to the Civil Rights Act and Civil Rights Movement in the United States in a big way, because people are all fighting they're fighting Nazis in France, and they have more equality on the battlefield than they do back home at the diner. How can I fight together with somebody, but then go home and I can't have a cup of coffee? And it really was that moment for a lot of them. So examples, of the diversity of the American Army at this time. And a lot of people that were immigrants before this, World War II was their way to graduate into being full-blown American, this along with the GI Bill. It really brought people together. And this is one way that positive nationalism, can affect the nation. When people move in the same step for a common goal and put their identity as American over other, racial or ethnic identities. Contributions. All right. So this is the part that I wanted to get to. Today, we are seeing a lot of different efforts in terms of rationing, maybe. There is talk of like a food supply chain with the coronavirus being disrupted. You might not be able to get all of the things that you once could get on the store shelves. And there really was this big effort. To cooperate in terms of rationing. What's rationing? Rationing means that they tell you a certain number of a product that you can buy because you need to save it all. So with the toilet paper craze today, with the coronavirus, people running out, if we were rationing, you would go to the store and they would literally say, you can only buy 4 rolls or whatever, or you can only buy a week's supply so everybody else gets a chance. And there are a lot of people today that feel uncomfortable with these things because they feel it's a violation of their rights. And, rightfully so, it is a violation of their rights. But during times of crisis, during times of war, rights are violated. And, this is one of the things that was important during World War II, because it mirrors some of the experience of today, some of the ways that our rights are being curtailed for the greater good of the nation. And we're going to check out some of these posters, and you can see it's really arguing and trying to shame people that aren't following the procedure. Sort of like, I live in Brooklyn and everybody wears a mask. If I go out to the supermarket and somebody's not wearing it, I'm kind of like, dude, what are you doing? You're putting everybody at risk, because the mask is not about the person catching it. The mask prevents you from spreading it. So you're not putting yourself in danger by not wearing a mask. You're putting everybody else in danger. You're really not doing the right thing socially. So let me check this out. All right, contributions. This guy on the right holding his hand up. I pledge to you, I charge no more than the top legal price fixing by the government. I sell no rationed goods without collecting ration stamps. So they gave out stamps and you had to trade them in for product, Americans asked to ration everything. Rationed items, sugar, coffee, shoes, meat, cereal. Those are the things people were buying out. Toilet paper would be added to this list today. Federal government issues war bonds. A bond is a reverse loan. Basically, it's a loan that you give to the government. So you give the government $100, and they promise to pay you back with interest, 150, 120, whatever it is down the line. That's a bond. And they raised a lot of money for the war by collecting bonds. Invest in the United States government. Needed money to help the Allies win. Office of War Information. They used the media to gain support. Basically, it's a propaganda office that they opened up to make posters like this, and inform people through the use of propaganda and encourage people, or try to persuade people to do the right thing. Here we go. This one's great. I love this one. When you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. And you see the guy is riding with the ghost of Hitler. And basically what this is saying is, to carpool. Don't waste gas, carpool. Do less. They'll have enough. Do with less. So, coffee was really big back then. Instant coffee was invented for GI ration packs. And they're saying, if you are greedy, there's not going to be enough left for the troops. Of course I can. Get it? Because she's canning goods. So I'm patriotic as can be, and rationing points don't worry me. Canning or making jelly and jam was a thing people used to do, or pickling to preserve vegetables and fruits before they went bad. Because if a jar of pickles lasts a lot longer than a couple of cucumbers. But if you pickle it, vinegar is a preservative, and it lasts for months and months and months instead of, all right. Food is a weapon. Don't waste it. Good stuff. All right. Shift in production. So there was a shift from peacetime to wartime production. Ford and GM, they stopped making, cars and stuff, and they started making tanks. Now, I wonder what this felt like in the moment, President Trump today calling on GM and Ford to make masks. I don't know. Are they actually doing it? Did it feel in the moment that they were actually doing it back then? That's what I wonder sometimes with this, is like, what did it feel like to live back then? Do we look at this and say, wow, look at this big effort by everybody? Or is that just the way we portray it? Who knows? American industry, peacetime to wartime production. GM, Chrysler, Ford went from creating cars to creating tanks. Lots of jobs. Boeing, regular airplanes to fighter jets. So this is the American government buying massive supply of weapons from American industry, effectively injecting money into the American economy. Government money stimulate. It's like a stimulus package for these companies, So that's one of the big differences, I think, between now and then, is that now the federal government is saying, hey, please make these masks, but they're not saying, we're going to come and buy, 1 million masks from you tomorrow if you make them. All right, labor's contribution. So with the absence of men in the workforce, fighting age men, you have women enter the workforce for the first time. And again, you see this trajectory of women entering the workforce, and then into the 50s, 60s, and 70s, women increase their awareness in the 60s and 70s, the first feminist movement, not the first, but second or third feminist movement in our country. And you really see this push for women increasing their awareness of the public sphere, and the public sphere increasing their awareness of them and acknowledging their effort, and them participating in society in a way that they hadn't before. You really can't say, oh, you're not equal to me. You can't do the same jobs as I can, if that person literally did that the whole time you were away. So African Americans, women enter the workforce in vast numbers. Workers in general go back to work after this, and this is one of the reasons. Aside from us, the increased manufacturing in general on the U.S. front, these are the reasons why the World War II is really credited with ending the Great Depression. All right, so this is a great poster. Give me a second. Let me. This is a great poster. Now, what I want to share with you guys is there's two images at this time that are called, not even at that time. There's one image at that time that's called Rosie the Riveter. There's another image that we call Rosie the Riveter today, but wasn't really Rosie back then. And I'm going to explain why. One poster was designed to portray women in the workforce realistically, what they looked like, and was called Rosie the Riveter. It was a painting by Norman Rockwell for the Saturday Evening Post because the buzz was, look at these women in the workforce, so look at the good job they're doing. And there was a lot of focus on that and a lot of stimulation of the American, attention toward that. So Norman Rockwell paints this picture called Rosie the Riveter. Back then, Rosie the Riveter was just a pet name they gave to women who worked, sort of like guys who were in the war. They just called like G.I. Joe, which later becomes the action figure G.I. Joe. But it wasn't a person. It was just something they called like, Joe the plumber is something they used during like the Obama years to just describe the regular working class guy. Well, there was no Joe the plumber. It was just the idea of a regular blue collar guy. Here, Rosie the Riveter is just the idea of a regular working class woman. So this image I'm going to show you is the real Rosie the Riveter. Ironically, the other poster that this poster, the We Can Do It poster, is just called the We Can Do It poster. And that was a poster by the Westinghouse Company, printed and put up in their factories to encourage women on the assembly line not to unionize. It's an anti-union poster. So it's ironic that, that poster and doesn't really, it's encouraging workers for the wrong reasons. It's encouraging them not to fight for their rights. It's actually anti-workers' rights. Whereas the Rosie the Riveter poster, the real one, really encourages a realistic view of what women looked like and the kind of like the efforts they were going through. Whereas if you compare these side by side, the We Can Do It poster is kind of patronizing. The woman doesn't really work. The We Can Do It woman, sad to say, doesn't really look like she's working very hard. When you look at these two women, the real Rosie looks a lot stronger and more realistic, whereas We Can Do It looks like she got just put on her makeup and is just posing for the picture. So we're going to look at both of these. So this is real Rosie the Riveter. Now, how do we know this? Look at her lunchbox. It says Rosie on it. How does she look? Well, she's wearing the double V pin. She's wearing all her political pins. She's wearing a Red Cross pin. She's very socially active. She's got her pants rolled up. She's got a rivet gun. How does she look? Would you hire this woman? Hell yeah, look, she looks strong as hell. She's having lunch, beginning, I was going to read the headline, but I don't think it has to do with this. Saturday Evening Post, Norman Rockwell. This is what a real woman in the workforce looked like at that time. She's taking the safety measures. She's got her hair pulled back. She's got the visor on her head. She's got her goggles ready to go. Rivet gun, lunchbox, political buttons. So check this out. Go look this up. This is the real Rosie, and it's before the other poster, and it's really worth giving credit to this image of Rosie because it's a more realistic, more powerful, more politically aware version of Rosie. This Rosie, as you can see, if you're going to hire these two women in a job interview and you were the factory owner, you'd probably hire tough, working class Rosie as opposed to, I just call it coordinated Rosie. But if you look on the bottom, it says War Production Coordinating Committee of the Westinghouse Company. We Can Do It. Don't unionize. But this is an encouraging poster today. This is an important poster today, and the reason was during the 60s and 70s when artists were moving into the abandoned factories in places like Manhattan, they discovered this poster in the old Westinghouse factory, and it was during the feminist movement, and they found it very encouraging, so they repurposed this poster, and today this is the Rosie the Riveter poster, and it is encouraging for women, as it should be, you know. So, I mean, the history behind it, I find interesting just because, you know, history teacher and this and that, we shouldn't forget the real Rosie and the honest image of what women in the workforce looked like. You know, I don't think it takes away from the power this poster has today, but the history here is worth remembering, you know. All right. So check this out. Go online. This woman, there's a picture of her at the end of the slides. You know, she was, I don't know if she still is alive, but both of these women still were alive, you know, well into the 20th century. Oh, this is a cool one. The goggles. Every minute counts. Check that out. This is what I'm saying. These are the propaganda posters that companies would put up in their factories to tell you don't slow down, don't stop working. Every minute counts. Don't take a break. You know, it's so like, you know, weird. I guess it makes sense. Keep production up. You know, it's the American thing to do. You can see here the little American flag. That's something that happened during 9/11. For those of you, well, not you, you guys weren't alive. But if you look at pictures, ask your parents. During September 11th, everybody had their little flags, and if you didn't, you will look down on. All right. Treatment of Japanese Americans during World War II is one of the biggest parts of this war, home front effort, you know, that is debated today. In terms of home front, check out the video. Hopefully this link still works. Or Google Japanese internment. Now, this is internment of Japanese Americans, not just internment of Japanese people that are immigrants that are living here, which means if you were American born, citizenship, and you just happen to be of Japanese ancestry, you got rounded up and put into camps at this time. Americans believe Japanese on the West Coast could be spies. They feared if the United States entered Japan, how would the Japanese people at home feel, or Japanese Americans feel? Would they rebel? FDR removed Japanese people, sends them to internment camps, which are temporary imprisonment. These camps are not nice places. A lot of them lose their homes because they can't pay their mortgages. Karamatsu versus U.S. is the Supreme Court case where the court sides with President Roosevelt here and justifies the military necessity of these moves. So this is a real conundrum for the United States then as it is today, because this is Supreme Court precedent, which means that because the Supreme Court gave the thumbs up to this move, it's still on the books, and the government at some point in the future, which is the opinion of Antonin Scalia, when he talks on these issues before his death, who's a famous Supreme Court judge, conservative Supreme Court judge, said, don't fool yourself into thinking that it won't happen again. It's on the books, so the government has a license to do it again. And all they have to do is say, well, it worked in Karamatsu, so, you know, there's a really good podcast called The American Pendulum from a series called More Perfect, and they talk to Fred Karamatsu, and it's really it's worth checking out. It's worth checking out. This is a horse stall in a barn, and think about this. You know, look at this guy's hair. 1950s, you know? These are people that got the selvage jeans on. This guy could be a hipster today. I think this guy lives down the block from me. But these guys were all American. A lot of these families, you know, they grew up in the United States. Fred Karamazov has little to no accent. You know, he has much of a Japanese accent as I do, which is to say none. And they were put into prisons, basically, that were made out of barns. It's a really crazy part of our history. Look at these pictures. These are Americans. These are not people who did anything wrong. These aren't people who sympathized, with some kind of Imperial Japan effort. Was this the right thing to do? That's for us to decide individually. But go check it out. Go check it out. GI Bill. All right. We're getting to the end here. The GI Bill, one of the most important things that come out of this is basically a package of benefits that American soldiers get, and they still get today. Now, like Social Security, which is another thing that comes out of this era, the GI Bill of Rights is not, GI just means, it's a general issue. It just means a soldier. And, because the soldiers have all these general issue clothes, general issue gun, they felt that they were like copies of each other. It's like, my clothes are general issue, my gun is, I'm general issue. So GI is a funny name for soldiers because they looked kind of the same. So the GI Bill gave them things like access to loans. The GI Bill gave them things like access to benefits when they got home. The GI Bill gave them free college for them and their kids. And it really was a way for American servicemen to not just adjust to life back home, but to graduate into the middle class. It was a way for immigrants. You went away Italian, Irish, Jewish, German, immigrant, and you came back, and now you were American middle class. And this leads to the birth of the suburbs. The GI Bill is one of the main ways that Americans went from the Great Depression to rocking and rolling with that one job in the full household. And what happens is suburbanization. So you come home, you got a bunch of money now from this GI Bill, and also you've been fighting, and your paycheck has been going in the bank. Now you got easy loans with this GI Bill, and you want to buy a house. Maybe you live in the city, and the city isn't that good because of the Great Depression. You want to move out of the city. You take that GI Bill, and now you move into new neighborhoods because there were other people that knew that the Americans were going to come back and built these neighborhoods, popped up in Staten Island, in places like Levittown, New York, pop-up cities. That's why, like, if you look down here, places in Jersey and Staten Island that have all these houses that kind of look the same, that's not an accident. Those were all built at the same time. Plop, 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 and they plopped these whole neighborhoods, and people moved out there, and it became the suburbs. Urban is the city, suburban is around the city, and then rural is outside of that. What else did you have for the first time? The family automobile. So you can you can live in the suburbs, and you can drive back into the city or wherever you work. You didn't have to. Now that you have a car, and now that they pave the roads, because if everybody has a car, there's more money for that. You start to build the highways, and one thing leads to the other. Explosion in industry. Because you have the house, you had to pay somebody to build it, pay somebody to design it, pay somebody to pave the road, and you can see how this domino effect happens, and the economy explodes. All these cars are for sale. So all of the middle class people leaving the city leads to a problem for the cities because they take those middle class tax dollars out of the city, and what it really leads to is a bad situation in urban areas. They call this the white flight, because white people ran away from bad or economically declining parts of the country. Today we call this a middle class flight, maybe because when it comes to things like gentrification. One of the big parts of that equation is it's not just white people. It's middle class people with money pulling their tax dollars out or pushing their tax dollars in to new environments. This is an example of migration. So everything's right here that I talked about. All right. So this lifts the United States out of the Great Depression. Ends the war, end of the war leads to the U.S. becoming a superpower, world's dominant economic military power. It also doesn't hurt that every other factory on the planet is basically destroyed except an American factory. So we're the only people open for business. Germany, Japan, France, England, anybody who manufactures things is done, completely decimated. So we help rebuild those nations, but we're the only people from business. So if you look at this spike and decline in our debt, that's mainly due to this manufacturing boom. All right. So what I want you guys to do at the end of this week, or the end of this lesson, but at the end of the week, I'd like to discuss. I want you to talk about the home front effort, for this exit pass. What are some of the home front efforts that, stand out to you? What are some that sound like things that are happening today? How are they going to affect the United States then and now? And what I'm going to come back to is this slide here. This is going to be really important for us, this suburbanization. I'm going to do a Friday video on this because this leads to so many, this is a rabbit hole. And this is such a long lesson. Sorry but this is such a long lesson. But this is the rabbit hole here that I want to go down, because the age of consensus means that everybody was on the same page. Were they really on the same page? Well, no, obviously not. But people from this generation remember it as we all agreed on what religion we were and what politics we were and what values we had. And in the 60s, that starts to break down. In the 60s, what really happens is other voices rise up. But if you were in this, if you were one of these white families that moved out to the suburbs and were experiencing this boom, that's one of the arguments about the greatest generation, is that it wasn't the greatest for everybody. There was a lot of prejudice against black people and immigrants still, and Japanese especially. There was a lot of people that if you were poor and you still were in the city, and the city was deteriorating because all that white middle class tax, all those white middle class tax dollars were now removed from the situation, and the city was kind of dire. That wasn't the greatest generation for you, but a lot of people experienced this time as the greatest generation, the greatest time to be American. And when Donald Trump says, "Make America Great Again," he's referring to this time period. So, what's important about that is to recognize why this time period was that way. It was because of massive manufacturing, the government buying things from American companies, massive manufacturing after the war, people buying consumer goods from those companies, because now those companies need to switch from wartime production to consumer goods, selling things like washing machines and dryers and stuff like that. And then finally, a massive investment by the federal government in the American people with programs like the GI Bill, with the FDR programs, with programs like Social Security. Those are the things that made the greatest generation. And the problem is all of those things may not be able to come together again. So I'm going to come back to this. This is a rabbit hole. My Friday video will be about this, the birth of fast food in the United States and how it's tied to the interstate highway system. All right. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like. If you guys can, it would be cool if you could tell me whether you prefer this format or the old format for the videos, because I'm trying to mix things up, keep it creative, but at the same time do what's most effective. I know this one was a little long, but if you're with me until this point, I thank you greatly. Um, you know, I have to try to keep practicing and doing this as much as you guys do. You know, also, this would look a lot different, obviously, if we were in class. This lesson would take me 2 or 3 days in real class because of the talking and the slowing down and the questioning. So I'm kind of just rambling and bulldozing my way through it, but it's what we have to do, I guess. So stay tuned for future videos. Have a nice day.